Hi there everyone, it's the guy from the Gamertag here, and today I wanted to talk about Apex Legends and specifically the current meta of the game, because I think there's actually some hidden gems within it that a lot of people perhaps are overlooking and not quite getting the best out of. Now it's fair to say the current meta heavily favours mobility in this game. There seems to be a sort of subdivide in the community as to the best character. Myself and a lot of people in the community view Pathfinder as probably the best character in the game. The simple fact is he has very high mobility. His ultimate zipline helps his team get around the map really quickly, but ultimately his mobility is centred around his grapple. It allows him to travel the map incredibly quickly. It gives him a tool to quickly enter a fight or very quickly get out of a fight. And that's really why I personally find him to be the best character in the game. It's the overall versatility. If you want to push aggressively up into a fight, his grapple allows you to do that. But if you really need to retreat, if you find yourself outnumbered or just outpositioned, you can very quickly get yourself out of that situation. And that's personally why I enjoy playing him. But then again, Wraith has been a very popular character since the inception of the game. She also has high mobility options. She has a phase ability which allows her to very sneakily enter into a fight or occasionally evade a fight using it. And her teleport ability is very useful for repositioning her entire team very quickly and is very good for taking enemy squads off guard. I personally don't feel particularly comfortable playing Wraith, mostly because I find that her phase ability is less useful when you need to escape. Quite often the enemies can just follow you, and you can only really use it as an evasive tool if the enemies don't see you phase to begin with. But for me personally, I actually find quite a lot of enjoyment in some of the less popular characters and weapons in this game, and I feel that there might even be an off-meta. And to quickly clarify, when I say an off-meta, I don't just mean items that are off-meta, I mean almost a sub-meta within the game that is based on unfamiliarity. So with the meta of the game being heavily favouring mobility, sniper rifles are quite often weapons that will be traded out, and none more so I would say than the triple take. The simple fact is that amongst the sniper rifles, the scout can be used as an aggressive weapon because it has a fairly high fire rate, and the longbow does very consistent damage, whereas the triple take is a bit more tricky to use. It's the simple fact that the 3 shots spread out the further away the enemy is, makes it a little bit more difficult to predict, and makes it feel less reliable than the longbow. But actually this weapon in close quarters can be incredibly dangerous. You can almost use it as an offhand shotgun if you really need to. When people get into barrel stuffing range, you're hitting them with 3 very high damage shots, and if you manage to line up a headshot, that will almost certainly knock down a low armor enemy. Now I will admit, this gun isn't as useful late game. It does do a lot of damage, and if you have the precision choke equipped, it can do a lot of damage to high armor enemies. But if you're going to use it in close quarters, it really only wants to be in the early game, because that's when the enemies have weaker armor and you can drop them a lot quicker. The simple fact is, the more damage you have to do to an enemy, the less useful this weapon can be, because its DPS is not particularly high. However, if you find yourself in a good position at long range with a choke, you can keep dinking enemies and dropping their armor quite quickly. You will quite often find that a level 2 armor can be dropped in about 2 shots with this thing if you hit all of your shots with it. And that is quite powerful. And I do feel that this weapon is actually quite underrated. So if you're in the early game, I personally would think twice before overlooking this weapon because it can be incredibly deadly. But if there was one thing that I had to consider the off-meta, it would actually be a specific character combo. Now before I get accused of being a complete memer, I actually do believe there is some tactical viability to having Caustic and Gibraltar on a squad. And the reason for that is in the last couple of weeks I actually unlocked Caustic. It's taken me quite a while to rank up in this game, so I've only just unlocked him as my 8th character. And so far I've managed to win 3 games. He's actually been my most successful character this season. But even more interestingly than that, every time I've won a game with Caustic, there has been a Gibraltar in my squad. Sometimes you could put that down to luck. At first time I won a game with that combination, I was like, okay, that was quite lucky. It's a bit random and it was quite funny. Then it happened a second time and it was even more funny for me, especially because at that time Kyle got to witness it because he was in the game, and he is definitely not a believer in the Chungus. And then in the last couple of days, I then won for a 3rd time. And whilst it was still funny, and I do still think a lot of luck was attributed to that, there could actually be a legitimate meta around these 2 characters being used. Firstly, they both have the fortified passive ability, which means they have 10% less incoming damage, and that can make a bit of a difference. If you're in a long fight, if you've all got purple or gold armor, and you're just chugging away at each other's health, and there's just that little 10% could make the difference if you're equally matched in weaponry as well. And what's more, the abilities do have a small amount of synergy, especially for disorientation. In the most recent game that I won with this character pairing, the Gibraltar in the last circle called in his airstrike on top of the squad of enemies. They got hit by it and some of them had to scatter. And then just after it, I threw my ultimate straight on top of them, which is a cloud of gas which traps them and does gradually more and more damage over time. And that meant that having already lost their armor and lost their health from the airstrike, they were now disoriented, they couldn't move as quickly, they couldn't escape, and we were able to reposition and take them off guard. And that is a really useful ability, and what's more, people do panic when they get in the gas if they can't see. Especially if you find yourself in an indoors environment, you can use the Gibraltar ultimate to stop the enemies advancing, but once they do get to you, the caustic gas can then just trap them in a haze where they can barely see, and they're also taking damage constantly. I do think there is some legitimacy to using this as a tactic. They are characters that you don't often see, mostly because a lot of people do not like them because they have no mobility options, and that is their true weakness, and I absolutely accept that. They have the least mobility, which makes it far more difficult to get them into a fight or to get out of a fight if they find themselves outgunned. But you can catch people off guard by using things they're not expecting, and I think that might be why I've had so much success and managed to win 3 games with this combo so far. But the real proof in the pudding is to try this out for yourself. I personally find a lot of enjoyment in using some of the less common weapons and characters, but sometimes it can be really useful to catch people off guard, and who knows, maybe someday we'll have the actual meta will be all about the gassy boy and the chungus. But I do hope you've enjoyed this video. This has been the guy from the gamertag, and I'll see you on another video.
You are the Apex Champions.